All right, so good to see you again, Dale and Sandra. So good to see you all. Sandra, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing. Cynthia, thank you for being here, and Colby, thank you for being here. I know we've got some other folk coming on, so I'm just going to give it probably about 2 more minutes before we jump in with prayer, and then give a layout of today. I do want to let you all know that the document that we discussed or shared last week was unable to get that out last week, but we're going to get that out this week, preferably before Friday. That you so you can have that as a resource and as a tool in your work and in your advocacy. But again, just so grateful and glad that you're here with us. We have a special guest with us, and I do want to share that Reverend Regina, as shared previously, I think in the last couple of sessions, she lost her mother, and so
Mhm.
she is in going through that journey of grief with her family, and so we want to be sure to keep her in prayer and keep them in prayer um, during this time, that God will not only comfort them and give them the joy and of memories, but also would just remind them and walk with them through the grief journey, and let them know that they're not by themselves by any means. So I just wanted to again lift her
Mhm.
name up for you all to keep her in prayer, and keep that family, the Henderson family, in your prayers.
Mhm.
So we got about a minute left as we are opening up for people. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome. So good to see your names pop up, and if you haven't already, feel free to drop your name in the chat. So and where you're coming from, so that way we can again build that community, and cross pollinate across different areas and things of the like.
And shout out to, I see someone's coming in from Owings Mill, Maryland. Shout out to, well, I'm only Maryland by residence. I DC native, grew up largely in Virginia, and now I'm in Bowie, Maryland. So truly a resident of the DMV, if you will.
The holistic DMV. That's it. That's
I know, like
it.
I am a holistic part of literally the D, the M, and the V. So if you need any recommendations, if anyone has been thinking about moving to the area, feel free to ask me. I've been in all three parts of the area, so I've got some good spaces and places to be in.
Awesome, awesome. We have Northville, Michigan, Ann Turnbull, and Janine Patterson with Shelby, North Carolina. Awesome.
All right.
So good to see you all. So it is 12:36. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. We're gonna open up with a word of prayer, rehash some of what we've gone through up until this moment, and then I have the great and distinct and honorable pleasure of introducing our guest, who is going to share some solid information with us, on being political and not partisan in this season of partisanship. Um, so let us go to the divine in prayer. And if you will, pray with me in the posture that is most comfortable for you. Let us pray. God of our weary years and our silent tears, we come to you right now, first saying thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for the opportunity to gather from different places across this nation and this world, to be about the work of your kingdom, to be the work about the work of your gospel, and to be the about the work of justice, love, and empowerment. And so, God, we just want to say thank you for that, for stirring up within us those gathered on this call and those who desired to be here but could not make it. We're thankful, God, that you have and are doing something within our lives and through our communities and in our nation. And we're grateful that you call us to be a part of that. God, we ask right now that you would be with us in our time together, that you would bless our interactions, bless our engagement, that you would be with the speaker for the hour, that you would use her mightily and speak through her mightily, in the work that she does and in the work that she is bringing to this space. We count these things and thank you for all of them. In your mighty and matchless Son, Jesus the Christ's name, we do pray. Amen and amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. So, again, welcome to those that are joining us for the first time and those who have been with us throughout this Lenten journey. I know it looks like our numbers are down a little bit, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Where when those can gather, we gather and we do all those things. So we're thankful again for your time with us and walking with us. So thus far, we have gone through three communities of the social principles, the United Methodist social principles, the teachings of this faith, and this branch of Zion. And so we have gone over the social community, the nurturing community, and today we're going to go through the political community. And so we're going to highlight a couple of things within that community, and then we're going to shift into our speaker for this moment, for our time together, who I know both professionally and have known in those spaces to be a friend and an advocate in
Thank
so many
you.
ways. So truly one of the individuals that in first getting to this space, I have looked up to for my time here in DC because of their commitment and their faith. So we're going to do that. And again, we welcome you all, welcome you and thankful for your presence here. So I want to share a little bit about, well, first a little bit about our speaker today and our presenter for today. Lauren W. Relaford, MSW, is responsible for developing and implementing Sojourners policy, strategy, positioning, framing, messaging, and advocacy for outreach and impact on Capitol Hill and the presidential administration. She is a passionate and mission-oriented public and population health professional focused on bridging the gap between social theory, spirituality, research, and practice to the forefront of our major policy decisions. And so I want to highlight a couple of things because I'm going to drop her bio if that's okay, Laura. Can I
Yeah,
drop?
it's okay.
I'm going to drop
It's
that
up
in
to
the
date.
chat.
The picture's new. So, yes, please share away,
Okay.
share away.
Okay, I got you. So I'm going to drop that so you can read more about her. But there are a couple of things from both her bio that I want to highlight. As she mentioned, she is a Washington D.C. metro area native. She has a BA in political science from Boston College and her MSW in social policy, clinical social work at the National Catholic School of Social Services at the Catholic University of America. And one of the things that stuck out to me when I first met Lo was that she is a political social worker,
Hmm.
and that in so many ways is both innovative, but it's also a very particular type of calling, and particular type of work to analyze and assess these issues, these larger issues and topics, from both a clinical perspective, but also with a faith rootedness to that work and looking holistically at how these issues affect our lives. So that is one
Hmm.
of the things I definitely wanted to highlight. And in all her work that she's done at Sojourners and in the with experience in research policy and advocacy. Um, she is a avid reader, loves her Washington
You can
football
see.
team, and spends time with her two. I always get this word wrong. Is it Deshaun's?
Dachshunds. And
Dachshund.
unfortunately, that's the only part of the bio that is incorrect. Unfortunately, our dachshund, Walter, passed away.
Oh,
But we've
okay.
still got a little bean named Riley who is just my best friend, which sounds really silly,
Awesome.
but yeah.
Awesome. So we honor the memory I'm sorry,
Brother Walter. It's
of
okay.
Walter. We honor the memory of Walter,
Yeah.
and we highlight the presence of Riley. So again, that is Lauren Relaford, and we're just so grateful to have you with us, Lauren.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
being able to speak to this. So we're going to jump right in. So the program is going to go. I'm going to go through the till about 1 o'clock, probably a little bit five before that. We're going to go through the political community, and share that with folk, with this group, and then just highlight a couple of things within that. And then I'm going to turn it over to you to speak to the how in this season we can be political and not partisan, as a part of our faithful witness. So the political community, we know there's five as of right now. We're preparing, of course, for general conference and those things. But as of right now, the social principles are broken into five communities, and today we're talking about the political community. And in that political community, there are about nine areas that really highlight how we are supposed to engage both with our government as well as within the political framework that we live in. So I'm going to read the preamble to this, and it reads: While our allegiance to God takes precedence over our allegiance to any state, we acknowledge the vital function of government as a principal vehicle for the ordering of society. Because we know ourselves to be responsible to God for social and political life, we declare the following relative to governments. And so I'm going to list those nine, and then I'm going to speak to in particularly because these are very not only hot topics, but there's a lot going on around them. I want to highlight education and
Mm.
responsibility. So the nine that are under there are basic freedoms and human rights, political responsibility, church and state relations, freedom of information, education, civil obedience and civil disobedience, the death penalty, criminal justice and restorative justice, and military service. So let me highlight again the political responsibility, because one of the things that we probably have heard in our churches, our faith communities, and even in our communities with either our family or our neighborhoods, is that the church should not be political. The church
Mm.
should stay out of it, and as Christians, we should stay out of politics. We don't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table because it is impolite, or we've been taught that it is impolite. However, throughout even scriptures and even again in faith tradition, um, politics and being political are whole part and parcel of our lives. And so we have as Christians, but also as Methodists in this specific context, we've been called to navigate, to learn, to know, and to participate in the political landscape of where we situate ourselves. While we understand that our citizenship is in heaven, we also realize that we are citizens of particular places, particular nations. And in order to see the thriving of those nations, we have to participate. And so for the political responsibility, the strength of a political system depends upon the full and willing participation of its citizens. The church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just and opposing policies and programs that are unjust. And that's a lot in a couple of sentences, really, in two or three sentences. But if we break that down even further, the essence and sentiment of that is, in order to see this flourishing of the kingdom of God and the beloved community, we have a role and a responsibility to participate through voting, through serving either on boards or serving on committees in our local community. The kingdom of God is not just relegated to our church, our piece of the church, but rather it gets its flourishing, its lifeblood, and its action in the public space, in the public square. And so there's no other way to shape and to influence that space other than by participating in that space. There's the notion of the strong ethical influence that has to be part and parcel of what we do, right? When we engage in seeing the things that are taking place in our backyards, and there are maybe policies from the city council or our town council or our county commissioners or board of commissioners, it is our role, our duty. Again, not to push the message of dogma or of doctrine, but the message and the essence of the spirit of this kingdom, and that in that it would find its way into the thinking through the creation and the legislating of particular policies. And there's again no other way to do that other than by participation. And so we want to really highlight that, particularly during this election year, um, there's going to be a lot. And I'm pulling some stuff now from this past Sunday's sermon. There's going to be a lot of mudslinging and um, a lot of illusion and delusion taking place during this electoral season. I mean, misinformation, disinformation, um, all of these coming from different areas. And again, this is politics and not partisanship, right? So this is not saying that one party is going to do it and another one's not. This is just the whole political landscape that we are in right now. But one of the things that we have to do is be, as Bible says, wise as serpent, well, wise as doves, and wise as serpents, harmless as doves, if I'm not mistaken. Um, we have to be discerning in the information, where we're getting our information, where we are, who we are listening to, what we are listening to gather accurate and factual uh, insight and intel. Um, we want to be mindful of that, because that's going to influence and help us make the decisions that we do make in the political space. So we want to be mindful of that. And then the other part I wanted to talk about was the education piece, which is also located in this political community. Because as some of you may already know, education, as Methodists in particular, there was a real push, and we know this right from all the schools, right? We know it from um, Southern Methodist University. We know it from Boston University. We know it from the school that I graduated from, that I'm rooting for in the NCAA, Duke University. We know all of these things, that they have Methodist roots. Um, and a part of that was because there was an emphasis from the Methodist Church, in that not only did people need to be educated in the tenets of the faith, but they needed to be educated in civics in order to participate faithfully and productively in the larger landscape of this nation and of the world. And we see that even with Catholicism, right? The many schools, Georgetown and Loyola and Xavier in Louisiana, we see this, that there was a push, and there was again, not to push dogma per se, while that might have been, there's the different distinctions, but it was ultimately a goal of training up and educating the population to be engaged civically in the process of this nation. And we see now, with the rolling back of and the all out attack on public education, the defunding of public education, the creation of charter and private schools. We know there are racial elements there. We know there are socioeconomic elements there. But the reason that we even had a public education system was to do those things, was to educate civically the students. And um, I read not too long ago in preparation for this, but also in doing some other research for voting rights. If you look at state constitutions, North Carolina in particular, because that's what I'm most familiar with. North Carolina has, within the state constitution, a mandate, if you will, to provide public education for its students, for its citizens. There's a mandate there. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we're up against with this before I read the paragraph. When you have a mandate to educate the youth and the citizenry, but then you defund public education, right? And then those funds go into private entities, private schools with a particular flavor, a particular understanding of their role in education. You essentially, you remove that civic education and that emphasis on civic training and civic understanding. And so if you do that, you end up with a population. Okay, think about it with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, Generation Alpha. You end up with generations that don't understand the functions of the government, and therefore are unwilling or just cannot participate in an effective way. And so I want you to see this larger project that's taken place here. And this is why, as Methodists, this is why, as Christians, the book bans and the other attacks that are taking place within public education, which is why they are so dire and so serious. It's why certain organizations are so dangerous in their attempts to remove those public funds, which we all pay into, right? Which we all pay taxes into, to remove those funds and allocate them in a specific dangerous way. So the social principles say is regarding education, we believe that every person has the right to education. We also believe that the responsibility for education of the young rests with the family, faith communities, and the government. In society, this function can best be fulfilled through public policies that ensure access for all persons to free public elementary and secondary schools and post-secondary schools of their choice. Persons should not be precluded by financial barriers from access to church related and other independent institutions of higher education. We affirm the right of public and independent colleges and universities to exist, and we endorse public policies that ensure access and choice and that do not create unconstitutional entanglements between church and state. We believe that colleges and universities are to ensure that academic freedom is protected for all members of the academic community and a learning environment is fostered that allows for a free exchange of ideas. We affirm the joining of reason and faith. Therefore, we urge colleges and universities to guard the expression of religious life on campus. And so, just to summarize and surmise what that is saying is that we believe in, as Methodists and as Christians, we believe in education for the whole being, right? Not just the reason part of the mental faculties, but also that education should be a spiritual journey and a spiritual formation. It should not just that we have it should not be wherein we just have book knowledge and technical knowledge and no spiritual knowledge or no spiritual awareness on how and when to use that knowledge and to what extent, to what ends do we use that knowledge. Are we gathering, are we training, are we training in divinity schools, are we training pastors simply to regurgitate the text and exegete the text without any exegeting of the cultural context that they're in or that they will be going to? Similar to with lawyers, are we educating them, training them to be, yes, practitioners of the law, but without any commitment to justice or mercy, right? Similarly with doctors, are we training them? We have to not just train them to be practitioners of the medical field and know the anatomy of the body and prescribe things, but are they able to contextualize that in the spaces and with the clients, the patients that they have? And is there a commitment to the well-being, the holistic well-being of that patient? Was just coming back to the district yesterday and had the opportunity to have a conversation with a person of the faith who shared an incident, and I think we see this more often than we acknowledge. Um, she had mentioned that she had a friend who was living in outside on the outskirts of Las Vegas with her aunt, and the aunt was in her 80s, I believe, at the time. And the aunt had a fall, and there was a conversation, of course, take them to the doctor and all that stuff. Well, the attending physician did not believe that surgery needed to be done. And basically, it was a thing of, well, she's older. It was rooted in that she was older, and like, this is kind of this is the end. Like these things happen. Um, and there are a number of stories like this as well, where there's not a desire to assess the situation holistically and then engage in what could be most beneficial for the patient. It should not be a thing of, well, they're at the end of their life here, seemingly, and so they had a good life, and hope all gets well. and hope they get into heaven and all that stuff. No, with every individual, and especially with our elders, we ought to do what we can do within our capacity to ensure the comfort of their latter years, the peace of their latter years, and the wellness of their latter years. So just wanted to highlight that and show, like, in education, it's not all about the technical knowledge. Yes, we need to be trained, but that training has got to come with the spirituality. It has to come with that soul formation, so that we know how to engage, when to engage, and what ways to engage that are most beneficial for the context and communities that we'll serve. And so I'll leave it there. Are there any questions from our participants or from the chat? If you want to drop those, please feel free. We can answer those before we make the shift over to Lauren to talk to us more about, again, being political versus partisan, and how we navigate that space. All right. In seeing none, I'm not going to belabor the moment. So I'm going to at this time turn it over to our more than capable and more than able guest today, Lauren Relaford. Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And sometimes my sound is a little wonky, so please let me know if it goes in and out. First, I want to say, I would say good afternoon to some folks, but I see we have a person in from Cali, so good morning. And I saw in the chat, Dale, you welcomed us to keep the Beltway. You probably have been on the Beltway. Clearly, we always try to offload that on others. So I appreciate you extending the invitation to keep it, but we would always love to give it away in the traffic. I first just want to take a step and really thank Kendall for inviting me on here. I was about to call you Brother McBroom, but I feel like that's super formal. Kendall said really nice things on the top, and so I just want to extend some of that. I have had the pleasure of being able to work with Kendall in many justice spaces, primarily focused around issues of voting rights and democracy. And so I've really gotten to know someone, not just as someone who's got the technical knowledge, but I think to what he was saying earlier, someone who infuses it with a spirit. And so I have, Kendall, been really blessed to do the work alongside you, to be edified by you. And I really appreciated learning more about the Methodist principles, in part because I'm a Catholic. I don't know if you can see, this is my Pope Francis bobblehead. So yes, I'm a Catholic. And I actually have the Jesuit motto tattooed on me. So I'm Catholic, but I'm like a cool Catholic, not a Catholic. Catholic is the joke. But there's a lot of intersections, I think, in United Methodist principles and I think Catholic principles about just getting engaged. And I think for a lot of folks, and I love what you said at the top again about being partisan but not political. And I think a lot of folks talk about issues like healthcare and education. And unfortunately, the ways in which our society has gone is those issues have become very partisan. All of a sudden, if you support one thing, then that must mean that you are part of one political ideology or party, and vice versa. And I think part of the issue with that is that it just put a lot of us in very awkward spaces where it's like, I support healthcare. I support services and supports for aging and older adults, kind of like you were speaking, to be able to thrive. And that has nothing to do with a political party. That has everything to do with my faith beliefs. And so I think it's actually a lot easier to be political without being partisan. And a lot of us do this on a daily basis. But to your point, we've gotten to this very hyper political environment where folks need to categorize you as something in order to figure out how to move a way around. And so I just really wanted to speak to the fact that a lot of the things that we talk about, again, are just rooted in our faith beliefs. Education, for one, that is a lovely salvo about public education and the need to be educated, not just to be able to recite, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue type deal, but really to edify you as an individual. And quite frankly, it's also an invitation to better understand our world, the world that God created. And the more you understand the way things work, more you understand the way in which God created all these different parts of the vine and how they move together, that makes you a better human being, right? And so I think, again, a lot of these things that we believe are just inherently natural to us, but the ways in which they're expressed or the people that support them are attached to a political party. And for some of us who have identities that are very political, for example, myself, I am Black. That is a very political identity. I am a woman. That is a very political identity. And then I'm a Black woman. So I'm just double political. It can be hard to get out of these things. But one thing that I did want to, and I hope that you guys take away from this, is just being able to take a step back. And one, feeling like you can have these conversations with people, and two, feeling like you don't have to have these conversations with it getting into an argument. And so I just want to take a second because I thought I saw something in the chat, but I don't think so. So I think we're good. And so let's talk about our faith beliefs and sort of how I navigate this, having the beliefs that I do, but working in a hyper partisan system. I think one of the things that has been really helpful for me, again, is reminding myself that the things that I support and the things that I believe in are a reflection of the character, as I understand it, of God, and the character, as I understand it, of Christ. And so if I support public education, if I support maternal health care, these are things that have nothing to do with a political party, but everything to do with my faith beliefs. And so I really encourage folks to dig deep into these principles. I think it's amazing. And I know certainly Catholics, we have Catholic social teaching. The Methodist, you guys have your Methodist principles. You have a whole basis of why you do things that's rooted in text, that's rooted in scripture, that's rooted in the world, that is completely divorced from political parties and certainly the way that they look like. And feel free to lean in on that. Feel free to tell folks that may be very quick to label you like, the only label that matters here is that I'm a Methodist. The only label that matters here is that I'm a Christian. And so I think that also gives you, hopefully, it also gives you a lot of strength, and it gives you a lot of courage to be able to be more open about your political beliefs, because again, you're not talking about a party, you're talking about a Christian platform. I was writing this down, but I like to do metaphors. So this may be a good metaphor, it may not be a bad metaphor, in part because I'm speaking on the fly. But I really appreciated, Kendall, when you were talking about education. What I wrote down, it's kind of our relationship with the political ecosystem is a lot like kind of our relationship with the educational system. Like, we go in there and we learn these things, but and that's like, this is sort of the standard. But for me, and as he said, I purposely chose to go to Catholic schools because I wanted a Catholic perspective on biology. I wanted a Catholic perspective on the fine arts courses I took. I wanted a Catholic perspective on history. And so that's the lens with which you look at it. And so again, that's very similar, or hopefully that seems to translate, in my mind, translated well to the political system. We look at these issues and we look at what's being talked about, and then we use that extra framing to better understand it, to better understand our position, and then we can share it out with others. I think a lot of folks, and I really highly encourage folks to take the time to actually explore what you think about these major issues. To what Kendall said earlier, again, there's so much information out there thanks to the World Wide Web. Some of us grew up with, encyclopedia, dictionary, and some of us grew up with Wikipedia. I am on the encyclopedia era. And so there really was an emphasis on critical thinking and analysis and taking in information and trying to understand it to the best way. But now things are so open that it can be really hard to discern. And unfortunately, it can be really hard to discern in large groups because everyone is consuming all this information and you don't necessarily know the sources. And so I highly encourage folks, especially in a major election year, to actually take a step back as part of your own spiritual practice and really think about the issues that are impacting your community. It can be really overwhelming because there's a lot of things to focus on. Sojourner itself has 11 different issue areas that we focus on, from climate change to racial justice to gender justice. And quite frankly, no one human being can be activated on all of these issues at the same time. It's actually really unhealthy. And I can say that as a social worker and someone who has to be constantly engaged on this. And you're never really going to understand an issue if you just have this bird's eye view. And so, what are the things, again, that are impacting you in your direct community? You don't have to think globally. You don't have to think highly macro. Like, look at what's going on in your back door. And think about how these issues are playing out. Think about the different factors, and then think about what your faith would say about one, just not necessarily how it needs to get done, because I think that's also where a lot of the politics gets sticky. It's like, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to help poor people? No. Do you agree that poverty is an anathema to God's will for us? And yes, if that is, then I care about poverty and I want something done. And that message is actually incredibly powerful, because once you get people to agree on the value of something, then the shape in which the solution takes place is probably going to be more palatable to folks on all sides of the aisle, because we have agreement on the front end that this is what matters. This is how we define the problem. This is how we understand the problem. Now, once we've all gotten on board, then we have the actual will to do that. And I think that that's a unique role that faith spaces play. We're not really engaged in this, but in the beginning stages of policy and politics is when the things are being formed, when people are trying to understand the issue. This is the space for people of faith to really talk about, again, not like, oh, I think we should send $1 billion here or $1 billion there, but I think we need to do something. The more that folks hear that across the aisle, it does create an echo chamber, an indisputable, echo chamber that you can't ignore. And it gives people more power to say, wow, this is something that I have to do, because regardless of where this person may sit or where they're registered, they care about the issue. In politics, unfortunately, it's very easy for members to say, well, they voted me in, and so everyone must believe that, and everyone must think that they want that. But I think that a lot of folks are also being represented by folks that they may not necessarily agree with and on either side of the party. And so again, when you express your values, that doesn't necessarily have to do with like what a policy looks like, because there's nerds like me who then read the laws, right? But you give the morality, you give the why. Politics and policy is a lot about numbers and trying to make numbers work, but numbers don't matter and policies don't matter if you don't have the narrative, that lived experience fused into it. And so again, that's why as a person of faith, your perspective is incredibly important. Your engagement is incredibly important in this arena, because there are some folks at the top who only see us as numbers and figures, as long-term projections, short-term projections, and they're not thinking about the narrative of our lives. They're not thinking about us from a holistic perspective. And so when you as a person of faith can stand up and say, I believe, let me actually just read like the education piece again, because I love that. Like, I believe that every person has the right to education. That is important because not everyone believes that. Even those that say they're Christian, even those that may say they're Methodist, they don't actually believe that. And so this is you are essentially testifying on behalf of your own faith, testifying on behalf of Christ when you say, I believe, my church believes, our denomination believes, our congregation believes, everyone has a right to education. And when you take that message up there and you're saying, I don't care, like, I'm not here to talk about what it looks like. I am here to make sure that you also believe that. That is really, again, really powerful, because when they finally come to the table, when they finally get to folks like me who are hoping and praying that they hold the same values, it's more likely that, again, they are at least going to be able to say, I do believe in education. And that makes negotiation a lot easier. And that makes it then a lot easier to engage in nonpartisan collaborative policymaking, because you have all people on the same page. It is really unfortunate, but we are not all on the same page. And there are a lot of folks who genuinely do not believe on the Hill that poverty is an issue. There are folks who genuinely believe that if you are currently living in poverty, then that's your fault. And I think from a theological perspective, we can pull a lot from Jesus himself about what he believes about poverty. And since Jesus is a reflection of the character of God, then we can also assume that that's who God is. And so again, to be able to go in and have conversations with folks that it's like, you're here talking about work requirements and welfare babies, but do you just care about poor people? Do you care? Do you care? And I think having those conversations, one will hopefully make any political discussion better because then you're talking about values, you're not talking about policies. And I think that this is really, we're in a moment culturally, politically, certainly, sociopolitically, where values are not being translated from the bottom up. They're being translated from the top down by a handful of folks. And that's why we have this really disjointed system, is because that connection between people and politics and power is now really hierarchical. Well, it's always been that way for some of us, but it's like hyper hierarchical at the top. And if you are a society of folks that believe that you should be politically engaged, then there is some commandment there, or a call to be able to start having these conversations with folks amongst your congregations about the values that are being espoused at the top, and how this is playing out in your communities, and how they're in line with not in line with what God says. I'm going to take a second because I feel like there's a rich dialogue that's going on. And I also want to be able to sort of in real time answer anything, or sort of opine or speak to anything that's been brought up. So I don't know if folks if there's anything that you've seen, Kendall, that you're like, ooh, we should really get to that, or I'd love for you to touch on that. I would definitely want to make sure that I capture that in our time together.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, wow, like just thank you for setting that up in such a way, and in particularly about regarding the values and how the values are not being translated, and the one-sidedness of those values,
Mm-hmm.
of coming from the top down rather than from the ground up. Um, and so, yeah, thank you for shedding light on that. And so, Valentine, who is from Burundi, if I'm not mistaken,
Ooh.
is highlighting, from what he's sharing. He says, "For me, our youth need education and love in giving, or what they are saying, I should say, in giving in social principles of the United Methodist Church. And then if they have no education on it, how is it possible to serve the Church of God?" And I think this is really getting at a thing of kind of going back earlier, like education, to this point of education, not being because it is, and even education is like a top down thing, right? We're depositing
Mm-hmm.
into our children, and we are forming and shaping them, which I think that should happen to an extent, but also realizing, or taking the time to realize, education can't be a one-way street. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that as much as the teacher is in the classroom teaching, the students are in the classroom teaching, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
teaching as a seventh grade math teacher. I know that, or former seventh grade math teacher, I learned patience, and I learned terms that I did not
Mm.
know that I needed to know, right, from a particular generation, and phrases and things, and being able to, I think the role of education and an educator, and since we're in this faith space, the role of like Christian education, broadly or specifically, is to realize that, right? Like I think as much as Jesus, what as Rabbi was teaching, I think Jesus was also learning, right?
Mm.
Know the story of when he stayed, he got left, or he strayed away and stayed in the temple. Um, yeah, to stay in the temple, by staying in that temple, I should say. And they had to go back, and he said he must be about his father's business. I think that was a learning moment for him, right? Like I think so. So what does that say for us if the divine can learn and be taught? Like I guess that's what I'm thinking in this Christian, the Christian context. So yeah, and I just was going to say, to Valentine's part, that extra education must be rooted in love and giving back to the particular, that local context, that local community, as well as the broader community.
Mm. So first, I I just really, I'm a nerd. So I think like every time we talk education, it makes me really excited. But I think also just like one of the things that came up was I think people when they think about education, they're putting it in within the four walls of a school,
Mhm.
and that is while of course schools are places of learning, and as someone with multiple degrees who's thinking about adding another, like I love school, but I think even if you look to scripture, look to the stories of a lot, learning is experiential. Education is experiential. Even for a lot of us, like you can hear something, but it may or may not make sense. Like a theory may or may not make sense until it's applied to something or we see it happening. Like we really learn by doing. And so I want to encourage and understand and get folks to understand that the things that we're talking about now, it's a practice. And so you will continue to learn and grow as you engage in this. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that some of this can be scary. Learning new things can be scary. Some folks grew up saying, you know, don't talk about politics, like politics and religion. You never want to talk about it. And here we are knocking down the two, right? But sorry, I lost my train of thought because, as per usual, Kendall says something and my brain is just like, oh, that's right. But it's also this marriage of reason and faith, right? For me, logic learning is not divorced from faith. It's actually enhanced by faith. And for example, one of the things that we do at Sojourners when we talk about Black maternal health is we do a did you know around Black maternal health, and we give sort of a fact, and then we'll say, and this is what scripture says. And so I think you can apply that same scriptural scientific method to politics. And so then then hopefully when you think about that, like your education has to take a step just outside of what you learned in high school. But you think about how you're being educated by other people, how you're being educated in your church. And how you're learning and really soaking in and then applying that same education to then your surroundings. I don't know if I necessarily like touched exactly on what you were talking about, but I think in my brain just immediately was like, oh, and I looked down at my notes and saw sort of this marriage of education and faith and us sort of decolonizing ourselves from the notion that you have to be sitting in a school in order to learn. Learning can take place just by reading through your principles and taking some notes. And then thinking about, okay, like this principle is a theory of education. This principle is a theory of political engagement. Now, what would that actually look like? And doing that on your own is a meditative practice, but it's a great meditative practice because you're sitting there thinking about what it means to be a Christian in public life in this current context without feeling like it's inaccessible because I don't have access to a classroom or I can only do this in this space. There are, and I can certainly speak from a Catholic perspective, and I think I can certainly speak certainly for the Methodists. There are so many books that are out there. You can go to your library, shout out to your local library, and they even have subscriptions to Audible or tons of different things. And so if you're interested, again, in a topic that is impacting your community, say you happen to be, you want to build a community center for children, go and read up about, there's tons of organizations that just talk about child development. Go and read up about what that would do for your communities, and then think from a faith perspective how your faith justifies the action. And so I think that's really what it means to be political without being partisan. Is you can say, I believe in education and this is justified by something. And I think a lot of folks don't have that justification. And if they do have that justification, it's steeped in misinformation, or they're kind of going along with a broader conversation and they actually haven't had time to sit down and think about what this issue means. Because the more you start asking people questions about climate or racial justice or criminal justice, and you start to see it, the argument starts to get a little weaker. They start to get defensive. And that's when you kind of realize that, oh, wait, this is a person who may be partisan politically, but I want to engage with them in a conversation that's less than partisan. And I also have some sort of practical tricks and tips to be able to navigate that, if that's helpful for folks. But I think I think the first thing that you do if you want to be political without being partisan is get your own ducks in a row, right? A lot of people want to have these deep conversations about things. And when you have them, you realize that they're just parroting talking points or parroting the things that they've heard. And they've actually not really considered the breadth and depth of this issue and how it's showing up in their community. And then going back and seeing what their text says about it. This is a great spiritual practice to say, what does my faith actually say about this issue or how it's showing up? And then I think another way is to do your own values assessment or think about the future and the thriving that you envision for your community and sort of create a statement of that. You can even do a community statement. If you are engaged at the local level, you can certainly work with your local government to say, like, these are just the values that we have. They don't even have to be, they can be religiously or faith inspired without having to be overtly that way. But those are just some of the things that I know we've talked about with some of our folks about how to do this. I think you also want to figure out what your own sort of political identity is. And your political identity is how a person or group of persons think about themselves in relation to the politics and government. And these are subjective values, right? And our cultural identity is a group of people or ethnic groups with which our members can't withdraw. And so don't think that like your political identity is static. Really think about how all of the other factors, your culture, your faith, your socioeconomic status then influence your perspective, and realize that like you don't have to be caught up in this political identity of partisanship. You can exist as a purely nonpartisan individual who just cares. And I don't think caring is in a political party. I know that this can be difficult to hear, but there are people on both sides of the aisle who actually just care about this country. Do we agree with the ways in which, again, they want to solve the problem? Absolutely not. And that's okay, right? But you find that the ways in which we solve the problem tend to look a lot more like how we hope them to, when again, we can just get people on the same level to say, I care about that. And that's what a lot of my work is. It's just going in and meeting with members, meeting with staff, and having these first conversations that are just about values. What do you care about? How does your boss understand this? How is it showing up in your community? And then getting on the same page. And then once it's like, okay, now we all agree, then we can do something about it. And again, those aren't conversations that happen that way, because more folks are like, I believe in this political party. So, if I'm a Republican, then I believe, in no welfare. And if I'm a Democrat, then that means that I believe like welfare for all. And that's also really restrictive, because not all Democrats believe that and not all Republicans believe that. So don't be in a very restrictive identity, because that's also not the way God created us, right? Don't allow someone to and don't be afraid. Like if someone is like, oh, you believe in free education, oh, you believe in healthcare for women, you must be XYZ. Don't get offended by that. Like, and I say that, and it's very hard, right? Because you know that they're saying that in a very sometimes derisive way, but it's like, feel confident to say, actually, no, I'm just a Christian. Mm-hmm. These are Christian values. I am speaking on things that reflect the character of Christ. And this is who I think God is. This is who I think Christ is. I know God is a liberator, and he is attendant and very persistent about our liberation, so much so that the second book in the Bible is Exodus. He's letting us know that he will always exit us stage left from suffering. And so my politics reflect that. My politics reflects a politics of, for, and by the people that is of thriving, that is of abundance. And when I say abundance, that means basic rights, which are laid out in our UMC principles. And if you have more questions, you can go there. You see, that's how a conversation should go. Because when you are steeped in your own values and your own understanding, anyone can say anything about you, but it's not going to hurt you, because you know in your heart. You have the facts, you have the figures, you have the narrative, you have the experience. And so when you come into those conversations with that level of confidence, and people start to enable you, know that you're on the winning side. No, and when I say winning side, you're on the right side of things, because people would be trying to talk to you about values and not talk to you about your person if they actually had something to go on, if they actually had something to share. Um, I would also, one of the things that we also talk about is um, clarity. And this is kind of like you, when you have that clarity, that's what I'm getting to. When you have that kind of clarity, who's going to say something to you? They have nothing to say because I am clear, baby. And so when you own the value of your own idea and when you own your own values, it's again a lot easier to have these conversations and feel more confident about that. Because again, you're just like, I've already got my points. We can have a discussion. If you have anything to add to that or something to opine on, then certainly we can talk. But if you're just going to be doing the yada, 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 if this just sounds like every sort of talking head show, then you realize that that's not your ministry, right? I also don't think that you have to engage, like every time you engage with someone, you're going to change hearts and minds. That's one of the hardest things I think that we as Christians wrestle with, because we're just like, no, the power of Christ compels us. And if I like, I am in this moment to make change. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're there to plant seeds, and then the next person is going to be the one that waters it. And then the next person is going to be one to walk that person along their own political and faith journey to help them really understand it. Don't be so attached to a personal outcome. Your job in that moment is to speak truth to power and speak truth to the values of your own ideas and your own Christian values, and hope and pray that that sits on the person. If it doesn't, as someone who talks to a lot of people who say they're going to do one thing and then they don't do the other, the best thing and the best way to regulate my nervous system when I get hype is say, you know what? We tried to do it the easy way. God sent me to talk to you, but you don't want to listen. So now you want to do it the hard way. Bless you. Good luck with that, because God will take you through some doors or some walls. And then again, just lead with that value. Like, I believe that we need to be tenders of the earth, because that's what it says in the Bible. That's what it says for folks. You want to lean into Genesis. Genesis says that Adam and Eve were supposed to take care of all the animals. Or I believe that when it says, when one suffers, we all suffer, that's extended to all creation kind, great and small, um, those that are living and unliving. And so again, when you lead with that value, who's going to come against you? Who's going to tell you you're wrong? And the moment someone tells you you're wrong, then know to exit stage left. Don't stress you out with some of these conversations. Let me do that. That's my job. And then also, when you're talking about these values and you're thinking about them within the context of, Methodist principles, invite others to that vision. I think a lot of times we talk about like, these are the things that are wrong, because there's a lot of things that are wrong, but also share the vision, right? Because God is a visionary. God is, God's imagination is amazing. And that is evidenced by the diversity in individuals, by the diversity in the creatures, by the diversity in climates. Like, can you imagine what God imagines? We can only do a portion of that. And so when you're talking about your values, couch them in a vision. I value a world in which everyone has access to free education, because education helps people grow individually. It helps them grow as a community, and helps us become closer to God, because the more we understand the ways in which this world works, the better ways in which we can tend them, right? These are political statements, but they're not partisan. They're not partisan. Notice I didn't say nothing about a political party. I talked about a vision. And if people want to argue with you, then you say, okay, well, you can go to Psalm 139 if you want. You can go to page XYZ and the UMC principles, and then leave it at that. You don't have to overly stress yourself out with this. Um, I I'm gonna stop because I could say so much more. And I'll share this with Kendall. But I highly encourage folks to do their own political clarity exercise before you engage in these conversations, because a lot of people are going to try you and want to see how much you know. Um, so don't get tried. This is how you can not get tried, but also do this political clarity exercise with yourself, and then practice this with others. So first, you think about an issue, and you say, what do I really think about this? We talked about this a little at the top. Like, what do I really think about this? What do I actually know about this? Because a lot of us think we know, and we don't know, myself included. And that is a great way to be super humble, is just admitting you don't know all the things. The second is, what do I need to share slash invite so this vision is possible? So when you're thinking about this issue, um, you should naturally be thinking about, this is how it is. This is how it should be. And so invite people to think about, or think about an example, or think about how this vision would look like, that you can then use as an invitation for this conversation. Um, the third is, what do I see here that needs to change? And so you start with a vision, right? But then you go back to your present reality and think about how to bridge the present to the future. Um, and then once you sort of have this, okay, I've got this is what I actually think, this is what I know, this is the invitation, and this is how to sort of bridge the gap, or the things that need to change. Then think about the things that need to be said that aren't already being said. Because a lot, again, is being said, but I think a lot of us feel politically dissatisfied because they're not saying them in a way in which makes sense to us. And so really think about, this is how I would talk about the issue, this is how I would say that. Then think about, what is my vision of what is possible. Again, there's sort of the broader vision, but then think about, in this political reality, what is actually possible? What is actually feasible for me to do? So this is where you marry the practical with the profound, if you will, or the prophetic. And then lastly, what is the most valuable thing I can say in this moment? And I think that this is really important, because this helps you sort of think about who then you're engaging with, right? Because what you say to one person may not necessarily hit the same way as you say to another person. So really think about who you're talking to, think about their motivations, and think about how you can position these things or couch them in a way in which they then understand. Because the best piece of advice I ever got was, seek to understand, then to be understood. And I think that that really is sort of what we should be doing. I think we're in a society where everyone wants to be understood, and there's a huge mental health diagnosis I could give for that. But I'm going to spare you all, me and my DSM-5 right here. But I think really, if we start to think about each other as we're having these conversations, and think about what folks may care about, these conversations are going to be a lot less shouty, and hopefully a lot more Socratic, in that we're having a discussion and a dialogue. I'm not here to change your mind. I hope I do, but maybe I'm here to plant seeds. Maybe I'm here to water you along your journey. I've taken up more time because I don't know if folks have things to do, but I just really wanted to sort of share some of those steps on political clarity that we at Sojourners, mainly Sojo Action, share with our advocates in preparation to get them to have some of these discussions.
Wow. Look, let me get, where's those reaction thing? The reactions on here. I gotta find one for, oh my gosh. Lauren, you have, it looks like they're not on this one. So yeah, I don't see it on this one. But you have brought so much to this space today. Wow, like I was dropping the notes and the nuggets in the chat. Before I go into anything else though, if does anyone have any questions? If you do, you're more than welcome to raise your hand or drop your question in the chat or in the Q&A, or even any comments that you want to share. You're more than welcome to do so at this time. Okay, seeing none right now. If I see any, I'll stop and pivot. But I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you for one, being willing to be in this space, but also being able to take these social principles and contextualize them to this Methodist space, and the community that are represented on the Zoom. I think that, one of the things that I think we often, by being in DC, that sometimes our agencies kind of get away from, is like, every city is not DC, right? Or every city is not those things, but being able to, like, walk with people in those local communities and make it real, and make
Mm,
it, help them identify what the larger mammoth is, and how it plays out in their backyard and how it plays out in their neighborhood and how it plays out in their church or their community is one of the great gifts. And you've done just that above and beyond and phenomenally. So
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for that. And I mean, you hit on so many gems uh, related to the importance of being rooted in those values and understanding those values before engaging in the conversation or in when engaging in the conversation, being okay to say, I don't know. Let me go check the social principles or let me sit with that question for a little bit before we, continue this dialogue. I think that's so rich. And one of the things I personally took away was you do not have to think that you are going to change everyone's mind.
Mm.
It's some what the song, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. You got to
Yeah.
know because that will stress you out, and I think it's really, particularly during this season of Lent, I really appreciate you highlighting that. This is supposed to be that time where we really sit and reflect and
Mm.
upon the coming week and with Palm Sunday on this way.
Mm.
I think it's very critical that we do that. We sit, reflect, and then from there we move, or then from there we speak. And when we do speak, we speak, of course, rooted in the faith and rooted in the facts. But
Mm.
we also speak rooted from a position of care and values and things of that nature. So
Mm. Mm.
I just thank you so very much. And thank you for dropping these gems and stopping by with us. I know this won't be the last time. I did drop your bio and the page at Sojourners in the chat. So
Oh,
if anyone
awesome.
is it okay to share, like if they want to reach out to you or have any further questions, can they do that?
Sure, please do. I think this is what we're called to do as a community, is just to stay engaged and informed. Like, what did Jesus do? Jesus did a lot of talking and a lot of
Yeah,
engagement. And Jesus was a hyper political figure. And so also, again, I think the last gem is, if people are just like, this is unchristian, like, be like, but what did Jesus do? Jesus
mhm,
talked a lot about the institution. He talked a lot about the conditions of his people and the fact that the government wasn't doing providing these basic things. And so, again, we are just following and upholding the character of Christ. Um, and I think from the Methodist perspective, your teachings and your principles are so rich
mhm.
that there's so much to fall back on and there's so much to learn about. And so I'm really grateful and appreciative of this time to be in communion and community with my Methodist family. Because again, regardless of the denomination, like the shared values here is what matters. And we had a very political conversation that wasn't partisan. These are the faith values that we share. And I think that ultimately is our call, is to just raise awareness of the things that we actually care about and hope that folks join that movement in taking those theories and putting them into practice in ways that really uphold and honor God and his um, reign on earth as it is in heaven, as we say. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, again, we thank you and we thank you all for participating with us. Thank you again. Good to see familiar names and new names on the chat, on the Zoom. As shared earlier, this was recorded and it will be posted on the GBCS YouTube page for later review, or if you want to share it, or if you want to, have one of your Bible studies or one of your groups get together and watch it and listen through it, you more than welcome to do that. Um, yeah, it will be posted. It should go up tomorrow, I know, by 7 p.m. on the YouTube page. So again, pray that you have a blessed and wonderful rest of the week as we are preparing for Palm Sunday and in preparation, and then into Holy Week. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And again, take care. God bless.
God bless you all.